Every business you have ever heard of shares one problem. Customers leave. They move away, they change their minds, they find someone cheaper, they simply stop coming. Every business on earth spends most of its energy fighting that one fact, except one. There is a single business where the customer arrives once and never leaves. Not for a year, not for a decade, not ever. And that sounds like the most perfect arrangement ever invented, until you follow it forward in time, and you realize the customer who never leaves is also the customer who never pays again. This is a cemetery, and the economics of a cemetery are unlike anything else in the world, because a cemetery is the only business that sells a product it must then maintain forever, using money it can only collect once. Follow that sentence carefully, because everything else comes from it. Sell once, maintain forever. That is not a business model. That is a countdown. Let us walk through it properly, in the only way this business can be understood, which is not by looking at profit and loss, but by looking at time. There are 3 acts: the selling, the filling, and the after. Almost everyone who thinks about this business only ever thinks about the first act. The people who own them think about the third, Act 1, the selling. Imagine a field, flat, well-drained, quiet, near a town. You buy it as ordinary land at ordinary land prices because that is what it is. Now you do something remarkable. You draw lines on it. You divide that field into small rectangles, each one just large enough for a single grave, and you sell those rectangles one at a time. And here is where the arithmetic first gets strange. A single acre of land can hold something in the range of 1,000 graves once you account for roads, paths, and spacing. So take a field you bought at the price of farmland and now sell it in 1,000 pieces, each piece priced not as dirt, but as a resting place. The price per unit of land you just achieved is beyond anything a developer could ever reach. No housing project, no shopping center, no tower can extract that much value per square meter of raw ground. On paper, in that first act, this looks like the greatest land conversion ever devised. But look closer at what you actually sold, because it is not what people think. When someone buys a grave, in most systems they do not buy the land. They are not given the field, they buy a right. The right of burial, the right to be interred in that spot. The ownership of the ground itself stays with the cemetery, and that distinction, which sounds like paperwork, is the entire foundation of everything that follows. Because if you sold the land, you would be done. Sale complete, obligation over. But you did not sell the land. You sold a promise. You promised that this specific rectangle of earth will remain a grave, undisturbed, marked, and cared for, not for a year, not for the length of a contract, but permanently. That is the actual product, not the plot, the promise. And promises, unlike land, have to be kept every single day forever, which costs money every single day forever. So now we have the shape of the problem. Revenue arrives in a single moment. Obligation stretches out to infinity. 2 lines, one vertical, one horizontal, and they never meet again. Act 1 continues, and it looks wonderful. Because a cemetery does not only sell graves, it sells everything around them. It sells the opening and closing of the grave itself, which is a service with real labor and real equipment. It sells the memorial, the stone, the base it sits on, the engraving, and often the right to install it. It sells the vault or liner that goes into the ground first, which protects the earth from collapsing over time. It sells premium locations because the plot under the old tree, the plot on the quiet slope, the plot with the view, is worth more than the plot beside the maintenance shed. Exactly like every other property business on earth. It sells family sections, it sells mausoleum space. And if it is smart, it sells all of this long before anyone needs it in advance to people who are perfectly healthy and thinking about their family. That last one deserves attention because it is the closest thing this industry has to a growth engine. Selling to the living. A person buying in advance is calm, deliberate, and comparing options. A family buying in the same week as a funeral is doing none of those things. They are exhausted, they are grieving, and the decision cannot wait. Any business that operates at that moment carries an enormous responsibility because the customer's ability to negotiate has been removed by circumstance. And that is precisely why this industry, more than almost any other, is wrapped in consumer protection rules across the world. Rules about disclosing prices, about itemizing what is required and what is optional, about not bundling the necessary with the profitable. Those rules exist because the pressure at that moment is real. So Act 1, on the surface, is remarkable. Extreme revenue per acre, multiple products around every sale, customers who cannot postpone. And no competitor can undercut you easily, because families choose the place where their family already is. If your grandmother is in this ground, your decision was made decades ago by somebody else. Try to find another business with that kind of customer loyalty. It does not exist. Which brings the obvious question. If Act 1 is that good, why is this industry not the most profitable on Earth? Because of Act 2, the filling. Here is the fact that breaks the entire model, and it is so simple that it hides in plain sight. The field is finite. Every grave you sell is a grave you can never sell again. This is the only significant business in existence where making a sale permanently destroys inventory that cannot be replaced. Think about what that means compared to anything else. A hotel sells the same room 300 times a year. A cinema sells the same seat every night. A car park sells the same space every day. Even a mine, which also has finite inventory, at least removes what it sells. A cemetery sells the space and then must keep it, tend it, mow it, and protect it, forever, with no further income from it. So picture the curve. In the early years, the field is empty and the revenue is strong. Sales are steady, costs are low, because an empty field is cheap to maintain. Everything looks healthy. Then, gradually, the graves accumulate. The cared-for area grows. Every year there is more ground to maintain, more paths, more markers, more trees, more edges, more water. The maintenance cost climbs, permanently, and never comes back down. Meanwhile, the number of available plots falls. Every sale is a step towards having nothing left to sell. Two lines again, costs rising forever, sellable inventory falling to zero. And they cross. There is a moment, and every cemetery in the world has one, when the last plot is sold. From the outside, this looks like triumph. Sold out, fully subscribed, complete. From the inside, it is the day the business dies, because on that morning, the revenue goes to zero and stays there, and the obligation continues at full weight for the rest of time. Read that again. The business is finished by success, not failure. Success. It sold everything it had, exactly as planned. And that is what killed it. There is no other business where you can say that sentence. Act 3, the after. Now we are in the only part that actually matters, and the part almost nobody thinks about. It is the century after the last sale. The field is full. The gates are still open. Families still visit. The grass still grows, because grass does not know the plots are sold. Everything still needs cutting, edging, clearing. Trees planted at the beginning are now enormous, and enormous trees drop branches, lift paths, and eventually die and must be removed, which is expensive. Stone monuments, which look permanent, are not. They lean, they crack, they fall, and a fallen stone is a danger, so it must be dealt with. Paths crack, drains block, walls need repointing, fences need replacing, and someone has to be paid to do every single piece of that in a year when nothing was sold because there is nothing left to sell. Now put a number on that, not a large number. Say the cost of properly maintaining a modest cemetery is some manageable annual figure, whatever it is in your country. Now multiply it by forever. That is not a metaphor. That is the actual liability. And this is where the industry did something extraordinary, something no other business has ever needed to invent. It created a machine designed to defeat infinity. It is called perpetual care, and it works like this. When a plot is sold, a fixed portion of the sale price, often somewhere in the region of 10 to 20%, depending on the rules where you are, is taken out of the revenue and placed into a separate protected fund. Not for the owner, not for spending, locked. The cemetery cannot touch that capital. It can only ever use the income the fund generates. The idea is elegant, almost beautiful. Every sale contributes a small permanent brick, and once the field is full, thousands of small bricks have become one large sum. And the interest on that sum is meant to pay for the mowing forever, long after everyone involved is gone. A fund that never depletes, funding care that never ends. Infinity balanced against infinity. And when it works, it genuinely works. This is one of the most quietly clever financial structures ever built by any industry. But now look at what it is standing on. That entire structure rests on one number: the rate of return. Perpetual care assumes the fund earns enough, every year, forever, to cover maintenance costs, every year, forever. Which means the model contains two silent assumptions that the world is under no obligation to honor. The first assumption is that investment returns stay high enough. But rates move. There are long periods in history where returns collapse and stay collapsed for years. In those years, the fund still exists, the capital is still there, but the income it throws off shrinks, sometimes dramatically, and the grass keeps growing at exactly the same same speed. The second assumption is worse. Maintenance costs rise with wages and inflation, and they rise permanently. Cutting grass is labor. Labor costs more every decade, everywhere, in every country. So the obligation grows on a curve that never flattens, while the income depends on markets that do whatever they want. A fund calculated to be sufficient in one era can be quietly insufficient 40 years later without anyone doing anything wrong. Nobody stole anything. Nobody mismanaged. The arithmetic simply drifted. And there is a third problem hiding underneath both of them, and it is the sharpest one. The perpetual care fund is fed by sales. Sales stop when the field is full, so the fund stops growing at the exact moment the maintenance burden reaches its maximum and stays there forever. The contributions end. The obligation does not. Everything after that day depends on a fixed pot of money chosen decades earlier by people who could not know what the next century would cost. So this is the real machine, and it has nothing to do with graves. A cemetery is a business that converts a finite amount of land into an infinite obligation and then tries to bridge that gap with a fund it can only fill while the land lasts. That is the whole thing. That is the entire industry, in one sentence. And when the bridge does not reach, here is what happens, and it happens everywhere in the world. Nothing dramatic, no collapse, just a slow reduction. The mowing goes from every 2 weeks to once a month. The dead tree is left standing, because removing it costs more than the fund earns that year. The leaning stone is roped off instead of repaired. Then the roping off becomes permanent. Grass gets long, paths get soft, families visit less because it looks neglected, and it looks neglected because families stop visiting and stop complaining. And eventually there is a place, still full, still holding thousands of people, where nobody is being paid to do anything at all because the money ran out and the last person who could be asked about it died 40 years ago. There are places like this in every country on Earth. The final chapter is usually the same. A local authority, a council, a municipality, ends up carrying it because someone must, because a cemetery cannot be closed, sold, cleared, or repurposed the way a failed shop can. It cannot become something else. It is the one asset with no exit. Which brings us to the strangest part of all. Think about what the buyer actually purchased. Not the land, we established that, not really the plot either. What the family bought, on the worst day of their life, was a guarantee about a future none of them will ever see. They bought the promise that in 100 years, when everyone who knew this person is also gone, someone will still cut this grass. That is the product. It has always been the product. And the price of that promise was calculated by an accountant decades ago using an interest rate that no longer exists. To see the whole machine in one image, stand in a full cemetery early on a summer morning. It is silent. Everything is sold. There is not 1 square meter left to buy, and there has not been for 30 years. No customer is arriving. No money is coming in today, or tomorrow, or ever again. And across the field, a man is mowing the grass. He is being paid. He does not know who by, exactly, and he has never thought about it. He is being paid by a decision made a century ago by someone who set aside a fraction of a sale from a family that no longer exists, and invested it, and hoped. That fraction is still working. Every stroke of that mower is being funded by a promise made to a stranger who has been dead for 100 years, and kept. This is the only business that is still working long after everyone who built it, sold it, bought from it, and worked for it is gone. It has no customers, it has no sales, it has no future revenue, and it is still running because it was never really selling ground, it was selling time. Everyone else sells you something now. This is the only business that sells you a century, and the terrifying, quietly magnificent thing is that mostly, somehow, it delivers.